We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
I suspect you've been looking forward to this program today, because we're going to be talking about everything from the Religious Liberty Commission. We'll get into some of that in just a minute. Of course, Israel, Iraq, the big, beautiful bill, and also the bunker buster bomb, as well as a variety of other issues, including the L.A. protests and a variety of other topics we will get into today. Dr. Merrill Matthews with us, resident scholar with the Institute for Policy Innovation, and Kelly Shackelford back with us, and back from the first meeting of the Religious Liberty Commission. How did it go?
It went really well. I would encourage people, if they have time, go back and watch it. You can go back and watch it.
Got the links there.
Yeah, and it's we've never had one before, and I was worried. I thought this would be the one that could be more boring to people. Because it was sort of setting the stage. What did our founders say, and what does this mean, and what is going on, and where do we need to go, and just kind of big picture stuff. And it was really, instead, everybody was like, wow, that was really incredible. Fast paced. I mean, one of the reasons is because the chair is very experienced. He's essentially the Speaker of the Senate in Texas. Right. It's a lieutenant governor position. So he's been doing this a long time, so he knew how to run a hearing. And so he didn't let the experts or the law professors or any of those people, they got 10 minutes. And then it was Q&A, so you could get into real things. And it was 150% success. I mean, it went really well. My goal with the commission is, obviously you're going to educate a lot of people. I thought after this hearing will be more interesting, although this one was really great, because when we're going to focus on subjects. So let's say the next hearing is on parental rights. We'll have kids testifying and their parents and real situations, and the electricity of that, I think, will be very high. The military, vaccine mandates, and people losing their jobs because of their faith, and all these things. Those are a little easier, but this is a really good start. But my goal, we have a responsibility under the law to do two things. It's very specific. The commission is to report only to the president, not to any other agency. Most commissions report to an agency. And we are supposed to provide the president with advice and specific recommendations on how to preserve and advance religious liberty. And my thought on this is I really don't want solutions that last 3 years until the next president. I think there are things that we can do that could be permanent advances of religious liberty. And that's what I'm really focusing on as I listen to these witnesses and as we began to discuss all this, is really trying to put together things that are going to really last. And so it's a unique opportunity. We've never done this before, and it's something that I think if we do right will last through our kids and our grandkids as far as providing them protections.
Kelly, tell us how many people are on the committee and the kind of makeup of the members.
Yeah, I'd say the number is 13. There are 13 people on the commission.
Unlucky 13.
Yeah, the makeup is very Trumpian. Let's just say that. It's the chair is Lieutenant Governor of Texas, Dan Patrick. Again, essentially the Speaker of the Senate in Texas. The vice chair is Ben Carson. There also on the committee is Cardinal Dolan from New York and Franklin Graham. So you got Protestant, Catholic, right? Dr. Phil. So now you got the media. You can
But a
see
psychologist.
Yeah.
you can see where this is going.
Yes.
I mean, Dr. Phil has a huge audience, right? You've got Ryan Anderson,
Yes.
one of the
Ethics and Public Policy Center.
very leading intellectual on a lot of
Yeah.
these issues, these cultural issues. Eric Metaxas, Allison Ho, who's one of the top appellate lawyers at the Supreme Court and below, and actually a volunteer attorney with First Liberty. So we love having her on there. Think that's a great choice. Carrie Progene, who was Miss California and was in the Miss America and became controversial because she said marriage was a man and a woman.
Right.
Very bold, doesn't back down on these things, so she's on there. Paula White, who heads the president's faith-based office in the White House, first time ever. So it's a great commission. It's unique in that we are the only group on the commission that is a religious liberty group. So we tend to have a lot more background and focus on this, and so which I love because we are able to really help. But I mean, you go back and you listen. I mean, every commissioner is asking great questions. Bishop Burm's another one who's on there. He has a pretty big podcast, Catholic podcast. So it's. I think it's something that everybody who watched it said that they just thought it was incredible, and I think it's a great start. But I think it's going to get even more electric. Like September 8th is the next one, and it hasn't been released yet. But it wouldn't surprise me, for instance, if it wasn't like parental rights,
Right.
And boy, what a big issue. Which we're going to be talking a little bit about today.
That's our action item today, as a matter of fact, and it's also one of our articles.
So I would just encourage people, be in prayer. Everybody who is on the First Liberty list got an email saying that the hearing's coming up, and we even gave them the email where they could send in if they wanted, if something, the commission has to receive everything that's sent in, so there are a lot of people that send in, here's what I would hope the commission looks at, or here's a suggestion. And we're able to send that in. So, if you're if you're not on First Liberty's list, make sure you get on there so that you get those type of things, so that you can. And a number of people sent in to the commission because they copied First Liberty on what they sent in. Lots of great ideas and lots of suggestions and lots of things that they wanted to be brought up. So it's a great start. But I think people don't realize there's so many commissions that just kind of hold commissions, and it's all about PR, and then they go away, and nothing seems to happen.
That's it.
You do commissions in order to kill an idea.
That's exactly.
Not to actually get some. When does you're supposed to report to them? Is it next summer or the summer after?
July the 4th.
Yeah.
The 250th anniversary next year,
like
July the
Doge.
4th.
Yeah.
So that's our report will be there. And again, I could talk about ideas, but there are some great ideas already on things that we can do that would be permanent and solve some issues that we talk about on Point of View all the time.
Speaking of that, let me hold up this book. This is a book written by Mark David Hall. He was one of the first people to testify.
That's right.
By the way, Kelly has the first endorsement of this book. And, of course, we've had Mark David Hall in studio a number of times. Did America have a Christian founding? And Dr. Matthews, and I sometimes that some of the pop historians aren't necessarily as accurate, but this is a really quality guy. And that was one of the people that you had a chance to hear from, wasn't it?
He did a great job. I thought he was a great choice because he's not only an intellectual and a scholar, but he talks to regular people.
Yes, so again, you can actually find some of the interviews we've done with him, and of course I recommend his book. Let's take a break. We have a lot more to cover, including a Supreme Court decision came down this week. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
The current debate about the federal budget centers on whether the government is too big and too inefficient. Most Republicans argue the federal government is too big. Many Democrats ask, well, where's your evidence that government has grown too big? John D'Elio is the co-author of a significant book about American government. He explains that government grows larger by using three types of what is called administrative proxies. The first are state and local governments. The EPA, for example, has fewer than 20,000 employees, but 90% of EPA programs are completely administered by thousands of state government employees, largely funded by Washington. Second, there are for-profit businesses and contractors that also mask the large size of the government. In the Defense Department, for example, the hundreds of thousands of civilian workers have been supplemented by hundreds of thousands of for-profit contract employees. Today, the government spends more on defense contracts than it does on official federal bureaucrats. Third, there are the various tax-exempt or independent sectors, which have more than doubled in the last 30 years. Many of them owe their jobs to federal or intergovernmental grant, contract, or fee funding. These facts will be important to remember when Congress and the public debate the federal budget. Although the number of federal employees look about the same as in previous decades, the federal budget is more than 4 times larger, and the federal workload has been dispersed and makes government look much smaller than it really is. We do have a big government and should not fall for this federal shell game that tries to hide from taxpayers the real size and scope of government. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free booklet on the biblical view on wokeness, go to viewpoints.info/wokeness. That's viewpoints.info/wokeness.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, we're going to get into the Supreme Court in just a minute, but since we were doing show and tell, let me hold up this book again because it is a very good book. Mark David Hall, and at that time I think he'd been George Fox, now he's at Liberty if I remember right, and the first endorsement there from Kelly Shackelford, but a veritable who's who of people that have endorsed the book. Goes on for page after page after page of people that have endorsed it, and that really raises the question, did America have a Christian founding? There's always this misunderstanding about the fact, well, you say that it was a Christian nation. No, not everybody was a Christian. There were certainly Enlightenment deists and there were Unitarians and all of that. But were there Christian ideas in the founding of this country? I think you'd have to say for sure. Any fair-minded individual would agree with that. This is a good book. But when we went to the break, Dr. Merrill Matthews, somebody you know, M.E. Bradford wrote this book years ago. I grabbed it off my shelf, A Worthy Company, in which he took the time to look at 55 of the framers of the Constitution, and each one of these sections tells you something about one of the 55 founders, and basically concluded that at least 50, and I think you can get it up to 52 of the 55 founders of the United States Constitution were Christians. They weren't humanists, they weren't deists, they weren't agnostic, they were Christians. And people always want to talk about, what about Benjamin Franklin? Okay, he could not sign the doctrinal statement of your church. But when you look at all the other people there from all these different colonies, we're talking about Christians, and we're talking about Christian ideas that came into this country.
And, you know, many of these people, these weren't just people who went to church on Sunday. Many of them were evangelicals and out doing real work for God, and also oftentimes writing on commentaries and comments on other things from an evangelical standpoint. Many of them were very, very strong Christians, not just Christians in name.
Yes. So again, go ahead.
One of my questions when I saw that, it just made me think of our friend David Barton.
Yeah.
did this book come out before David Barton started Wall Builders? I think it did.
Yes, it came out in 1982.
Yeah.
And I had a couple of books like that on my shelf, which is groaning under the weight of all these books I've had on Christian history over the years. And so a lot of those individuals, and there have been some questions being raised about some of the pop historians, but if you go through the kind of work that Mark David Hall and others have done, great individuals. Philip Hamburger is another one that comes to mind. And so the point is you're getting the best of the best giving testimony.
Yes.
And then you're getting a chance to take those ideas and bring them front and center. And I watched Kelly Shackelford talk about something we've heard him say before. That is, why is the First Amendment there? It was the First Amendment because if you lose religious liberty, you lose everything else. And it's not a surprise, I'll let you explain it better than I can, that when you look at these dictatorships, the first thing they go after is the church, because a dictator wants the government to be supreme. They don't want somebody to believe God is supreme. And I heard you give that presentation right there in front of everybody.
No, that's exactly right. And, again, they took that clip our staff did off of the hearing and put it on our social media and all that.
I think we've got it up here somewhere.
As a way to get that out there. And I think they even, I think in the what you have linked there, when they go to my interview on it, I think they show my opening statement, which has that in there.
We have your recap of the first Religious Liberty Commission, and that's, of course, part of First Liberty Live. So that's the very first article. We also have your reflections on it, and we also have a press conference. So you can kind of see all the material there.
Well, I would just say this, too. The interesting thing to me, because I didn't know what was going to come out of the experts and professors and stuff tend to be, kind of basics of everything. But there was a real strong statement, and I thought it was interesting. It was, of course, it really made the leftists very, very nervous. But the professors are saying, look, because we asked them, what should change? Right? What from way things are now, where have they kind of you talked about the founding, and now we've had all these cases, and clearly we had a lot of wild cases in the 1940s and 50s and 60s and all that brought us off, and now we're kind of coming back. But what do you think is the biggest thing that we haven't come back? And really one of the big messages was the court ought to start speaking, and so should American leaders. It's okay to promote religion. There were decades of years where you had courts saying, well, you can't promote religion. And so, not even in general, right? Now, the founders in the Establishment Clause didn't want us to promote one religion over another.
Right.
And they didn't want the government to telling anybody, restricting their freedom of conscience, freedom of religion. But the idea that they didn't promote religion in general it's a complete lie. And yet that is what we've been doing. And so when you do that and the government can't promote religion, you essentially put them in a position where they end up being hostile to religion. Because wherever government is, religion can't be around. And they were saying that we've gone a lot in the right direction of no more discrimination. If you have a program, you have to treat the religious people the same as the non-religious people. But they said the thing that's kind of missing is we really need to get to this deal that religion is a good. Our founders believed it was good. I mean, look at all this. We had one of the witnesses talked about all the social programs and the lives that are impacted by the church and all these ministries that reach out to people. And so ignoring that is not helpful, and ignoring the positive. So I thought that was really an interesting part of the discussion, that the court has been too slow to get rid of this thing we've had now for, 80 years, really, from court decisions that has said somehow the government can't promote religion in general. It has to kind of be, quote, neutral, which means it has to kind of ignore or almost make sure there's no anything that's supportive of religion in general.
And I think I'd take Kelly one step further, saying that the founders didn't think religion was just a good, but a necessity. Because you can't have a people that governs themselves unless they have that of moral foundation there. And the question is, because law is about morals. Law says this is right and that's wrong. And the question is always, who's telling me what's right and what's wrong? Based on what? And you've got to have that moral foundation that comes from religion to be able to say, this is why we think murder is wrong. It's not just because we all disagree, we think it's a bad thing to do. It's because there's a religious element that we have a history of.
And that's, there's the old phrase that you can't have enough police officers if people aren't in restraint of themselves. I mean, there's no way. And so without that underpinning, this is why...
As we see in New York. Or Los Angeles.
Yeah. We tried. It wasn't enough in Los Angeles, right? They had to bring in the National Guard.
That is right.
So anyway, it's great. It's great information. It's great for people who haven't thought about it. And so one of the purposes of the commission, I think, is to educate people. And as we start going into specific areas and all these people who are under persecution in the United States, I think that'll do that. But again, the ultimate goal is recommendations that will do things that have a long-term impact. And I think there are lots of opportunities there.
Well, again, just one of the issues that you can think of in terms of the founders, they talked about cultivating public virtue. Of course, John Adams saying that we have a moral government and it's wholly inadequate for any other. The reality is so often is that they were trying to promote religion. And back to the point you made a minute ago, if indeed you don't have personal morality and public virtue, you can't put enough police officers in every street corner to get people to act rightly. They assumed that government was going to have a place and always has had a place until, I guess, the lemon test and a few things like that.
We talked about, that was one of my favorite things is everybody that seemed to get up would seem to at one point veer into the mention of the lemon test being discarded. Now, none of them pointed and said, hey, that was your case, wasn't it? No, but that's
well,
okay.
We all know.
That's okay. It's it just shows what a big change, really a pivot point for our inflection point for our country and how that began to shift the momentum in a totally different direction. So it was, I was encouraged by the start, and I think that getting back to who we are as a country, boy, we need that right now. I mean, the divisiveness, the craziness, right? That
Can't make it up.
Yeah.
How bad?
I think that if we start seeing nativity scenes at Christmas and menorahs at Hanukkah and the reflection that we are religious people with a religious heritage and we have a certain value set that holds us together, that'll make a big difference for our country, especially at a time when so many attacks are coming on the very foundations of who we are as a country.
Well, again, we got information about the Religious Liberty Commission. We have information about First Liberty and all sorts of issues that are related to that. If you'd like to see Kelly's reflection at First Liberty Live, we've got that on the website as well. We come back, though, we had a decision that came from the Supreme Court in a case in Tennessee about gender reassignment surgery and gender transition, and we'll talk about that right after this.
It was not that long ago that censorship appeared to be almost inevitable. Free speech was being attacked and strangled in many places. And some of us wondered if this was the end. But now, many feel a new sense of hope, a chance for a fresh dawn. Let me caution you, now is not the time to relax. It's a time to press forward, to use this fresh opportunity to proclaim and learn how to apply truth to current issues. By the fact you're here, listening right now, that tells me that you recognize the vital role Point of View plays as a voice of truth. For more than 50 years, we've informed and equipped people who have made a real difference. And when you give to Point of View today, you breathe life into what can be a new golden era for the truth. Please, take a moment right now and invest in truth. Visit pointofview.net or give it 1-800-347-5151. That's pointofview.net. Click in now or call 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
In studio with me today, Kelly Shackelford, Merrill Matthews. By the way, if you would like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Want to hold up the booklet that we did 2 years ago on transgenderism. We'll have to update it dramatically now, simply because you've now had some Supreme Court decisions coming down. We've learned a lot more from what is happening in Europe. As we mentioned even yesterday, Chief Justice John Roberts took the time to quote from some of the research from countries like the United Kingdom and Finland and Sweden. Also, you had Amy Coney Barrett talking about detransitioners and the rest. But let me first of all come to Kelly Shackelford, because we have posted one of your press releases from First Liberty Institute. And a lot of people say, okay, what does this mean? Now the Supreme Court has ruled 6-3 that says Tennessee, and by implication 20 other states, can limit or even ban the gender transitions for minors.
Yeah, and before I get to the decision, let me tell you our brief that we filed in there was on behalf of a mom, because it shows you what's happening out there with this. A mom who had a child in California that was in school that was having real problems with depression. So she actually confided with the school about this. And the school decided that what her daughter really needed was to join an LGBT group, and then they began to, unbeknownst to the mom, giving her testosterone and eventually taking her away from her mother, and transitioning her with all of these things. Well, you know, the sad end of the story is she ended up committing suicide.
Wow.
And so this is serious stuff they're talking about here. And boy, there's so many thoughts on this opinion. I mean, I think most people know 6-3. The court said Tennessee can have a law that says you can't do this to children, you know, male or female. This is like mutilization. This is using, medical things that can't be reversed to some extent that will totally change, if not destroy, their lives. Can a state decide, as a matter of public policy and the medical information they have, that this is bad, we're not going to allow this for minors? Supreme Court said 6-3. Number one, 6-3.
Should be 9-0.
How about 9-0? Yeah. Okay, so, I mean, it's just outrageous,
right.
But I just remind people, because there's a lot of people, this is Christian radio, that say, politics, need to stay out of politics, Christians. If President Trump hadn't been president 8 years ago, there would be different justices. This would almost assuredly be declared unconstitutional. No state would have been allowed to stop this. How many children's lives would have been destroyed or mangled horribly? This is not going to happen because we have a Supreme Court. And again, this is not a theory. Look at the three. Okay, in this case, you've got 6 that were appointed by Republicans, 3 that were appointed by Democrats. Now, I wish it wasn't this way. I wish it was 9-0. It should be, but it was 6-3. Now, I'm not saying that the 6 is exactly the way I would have done it. I mean, it could have been better, I think. They also did some stuff in the language that's disturbing.
They kind of assumed some things, didn't they?
Yeah, they used
gave the other side
pro-transgender language and how they described things.
Yeah.
It legitimized the whole thing. So, and this is Chief Justice Roberts that wrote this with a key to what these terms meant. You shouldn't be making up new terms, So
words mean something.
There are some things in it that are not great, and they could have resolved the question more permanently by saying, look, this transgender idea that they have some sort of heightened status under equal protection, they do not. They could have said that. Instead, they just skipped the issue and kind of read into this case that, hey, look, this wasn't based upon, quote, sex at all. This was no matter what your sex. If you're a minor and you do these kinds of medical procedures, then so the equal protection argument wasn't some specialized class. but they could have been stronger. They did the right thing, at least, in upholding the law. And there are a lot of other states. I don't know the number. Is it 23? I think.
I just said 20, but it's whatever
20-something states. And I would hope there would be more.
Yeah.
I know some attorneys, some who were interns with us, that went and worked with big law firms and then left specifically to start a practice to represent people once they become of age. To go back after the doctors, the big pharma, all the hospitals, the people that made lots of money off of them to their detriment. Now that won't happen, at least in these states. And so a very important decision, and I think, again, a reminder to people that who you elect really does matter, and the judges they put on the court really does matter.
Now, and to carry Kelly's point on, we've had Jordan Campbell on twice on Point of View, who is one of those attorneys who left a large law firm and has established these practices. And I would think that the Supreme Court decision will actually help him because he's representing, as you said, people who were minors at one point and went through these processes. And they're taking this to civil court to try to get remuneration from that, and I would suspect this will probably help them. And one other thing on the parental rights, we're talking about people who undergo surgeries and so forth, but there have been cases, I think, in California and others where if you want to adopt a child, and unless you're willing to say, well, if my child decides to become transgender, I will support it.
There you go.
Then you don't even get to adopt the child. I mean, we're not even there. It's an infant, and it may be 15 years down the line. But unless you're willing to say that, you don't get to the adoption.
And they're kicking people off of foster. I mean, we don't have enough people caring for these children. And in some states, they're making it to where, I think it was Massachusetts I just saw recently, others, where they're taking parents who have done an incredible job of fostering kids that there's no one for, and they're being told, no, we'd rather all the kids suffer because we don't like your beliefs about transgenderism. Yes. And so this is a big issue with regard to kids around the country. And look, the verse that I think of, we're on Christian radio, is when Jesus said, better have a millstone tied around your neck and thrown into the sea than to make one of these little ones stumble. Boy, is this right in the center of that bullseye. So this is a really important issue that really every Christian should be standing up about. And thank goodness we have this decision, but there's still a lot more work to go.
And I just mentioned, we've discussed this before, there are laws in, I think, most states against genital mutilation on young girls for a religious practice that goes on. Yes. And they said, no, even if the child and the parent consent, you can't do this.
Can't do that.
And yet you have genital mutilation going on in these transgender systems.
And again, that brings us back to the three against, because the argument I was making the other day, I want to get your thoughts, is part of that is just process. Does a state have a right to protect minors? For example, you usually have to get permission to get tattoos or to get even ear piercing or anything like that. And even tattoos could be possibly removed. You cannot reverse some of these irreversible actions. And yet I took the time to read a little bit of some of the dissenting comments, and it's all about what we're doing to the transgenders, not supporting the transgender. It almost shows how ideology trumps even common sense and logic in some of these decisions that are coming down.
Well, no doubt. I mean, this has always been a problem on the Supreme Court. And I remember I was up in D.C. during one of the judicial nominations. I was talking to one of the reporters, and they kind of had this question that was saying, well, I know the Republicans pick people who support Republican principles, and the Democrats pick people who support. And I said, no, that's not what happens. The judicial philosophy is, for the Republican side, is it doesn't matter what they believe. The idea is follow the law.
Right.
And that means, in this case, they're not putting a one size fits all for the country. They're saying Tennessee can do this. They are the ones who make these decisions. The legislature makes these moral decisions about, is this wrong? Is this something damaging to society? Is this damaging to the kids? Do we need to step in? They're the ones. Whereas the Democrats tend to go to whatever their political solution that they want, the judges tend to go to that instead of the process. I mean, Thomas a number of times has said, I think this law is nuts.
Yes.
But I'm a justice. I'm not a legislator. So it's not unconstitutional. So he's upheld.
That's right.
That is a very different approach that they take generally on these cases.
We're going to probably move on, but let me just mention that the press release that we have there also gives you a link to the Friend of Court brief. If you'd like to hear the story of Abigail Martinez, who is the woman who lost her daughter, that was part of their brief, and so you can get some facts and material there. And I think it's a very compelling argument that they used at the courtroom. And so if you'd like to know more, it's on the website at pointofview.net. We're going to cover some other issues right after this.
Historic Christianity celebrates May 31st as the Feast of the Visitation, which has also been described as the first meeting of Jesus and John the Baptist. Mary, early in her pregnancy, travels to visit her cousin Elizabeth, who is much further along in her pregnancy with John the Baptist. The verse is Luke 1:44, where Elizabeth exclaims, "Behold, when the sound of your greeting came to my ears, the baby in my womb leaped for joy." Such an important moment, revealing John's recognition that Mary carries in her womb the coming Messiah. And though not yet physically formed, the Christ child is also a human baby. The Anglican Compass describes this as yet one more reason Anglicans are pro-life. Well, not every Anglican. For me, statements by Anglican Bishop N.T. Wright, New Testament scholar and one of the most influential theologians of our day, take him out of the pro-life category. Recently, on a YouTube podcast, Premiere Unbelievable, Bishop Wright was asked about whether Christians should defend life from the moment of conception. He posed exceptions for rape and incest, saying, quote, "With sorrow and a bit of shame, the best thing to do is as soon as possible to terminate this pregnancy," meaning, kill this baby. N.T. Wright gave a couple of examples, one being that when there is a possibility or fear of the child's severe deformity, the correctness of a decision to abort the child is, quote, "absolutely clear for the mental health of the mother." He also voiced his concern about the optics of unmarried men from the Catholic hierarchy telling a woman what she can and cannot do. He called this male bullying, which we should avoid like the plague. Matt Walsh of the Daily Wire features a segment he calls the Daily Cancellation. One day, a couple of weeks ago, he chose to cancel N.T. Wright. Abortion kills a human being. On abortion, Bishop Wright is wrong. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, Kelly Shackelford, Merrill Matthews in studio with us. And if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. You know, earlier in the week, I said I don't want to always get involved in intramural battles, you know, one domination against another, and what do you want to get into, baptism or predestination or all the rest. And same thing politically. Sometimes you have one group saying one thing and one group saying the other. But this has gotten a little bigger than this, because even within the so-called MAGA MAGA movement or the America First movement. There's quite a bit. And I love the way Dan McLaughlin put it, and that is it's a horseshoe coalition against Israel on Iran. Now, that's maybe overstated, but you do hear people like Bernie Sanders on the left saying some things that sound a little bit like Charlie Kirk on the right. You have Tucker Carlson saying some things that sound a lot like Elizabeth Warren, and this goes on for pages. Now, part of that is not everybody's anti-Israel, but the point is there are a lot of people that are anti-boots on the ground, anti-forever war, and it illustrates again that sometimes people think of the political spectrum in a line. It's more like a horseshoe. And back in the 1990s, Dr. Matthews, I can remember times when I would hear Ralph Nader and Pat Buchanan saying almost the same thing. And politically, they're about as far apart as possible, but they were both looking at things sort of from a populist point of view, weren't they?
Yes, they were. And so, yes, that's the point. And the horseshoe element is the notion that when you go out on the extreme ends of things, it tends to kind of come around and form a circle so that the two opposite sides end up being similar on some things. And so, yes, that's one of the issues that's swirling around here as we see this. And some of the MAGA people have been really critical of the president, thinking, even to the point of saying the president is abandoning the America First movement. And I believe I remember President Trump saying, I'm the one who created the America First movement.
Yeah. He was getting upset with a few people. Yeah.
It is interesting because I will say most movements have principles. President Trump is really his own principle. I mean, it's kind of the way he feels today, and we see sometimes he's strongly one thing for one thing one day and strongly against the next day, or vice versa. We weren't going to allow Nippon Steel to buy U.S. Steel. Now we're going to allow them to buy U.S. Steel, but you can make a case for this because it's very strong. I mean, Israel has the best intelligence, I think, out there.
No doubt
about that. And the
that.
notion that they've been able to pull off some of these things, including the pager explosions and other things, it just tells me they know what they're doing when they say this is a real issue.
It's like a Tom Clancy novel and some of the things to come. But Kelly, you know some of these individuals, and I'd love to get your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, number one, I would say this is a really, I always think that it's Dan McLaughlin, right, that wrote this.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think he does some really good work. So I think this is one of those things I would highly encourage people to go to
pages of all these quotes.
Go to pointofview.net and read the article. It's really kind of creepy as you read down, because what you do is you read the quote and then you get to who said the quote right under it. But as you're reading the quote, you're thinking, oh, this is probably a conservative, and it's like Talib, right? And then you're on the other side, you're like, oh, I think this is a progressive, and it's somebody in the MAGA movement, and you're like going, wow, this is really, really interesting. And I mean, the thought I had on this was how complex this issue is. Mm-hmm. And so one of the reasons it's complex, we'll start with the first thing, is something that I don't think we've been discussing very, very much in the Christian community, and we probably need to. And I was with Charlie Kirk about 2 months ago when he talked about what's happening with the young men, how all these young men who haven't been going to church are starting to go back to church. They're tired of the feminization. They're tired of the attacks. They're looking for meaning. They're looking for structure. And it's a great thing. Like the stat shows, right? For the first time in the history of our country, more young males are in church than young females. So that's a great thing. But then he said, the one thing I will mention, though, is they're not as pro-Israel. And he wasn't saying they were anti-Semitic. He was just saying they just kind of don't buy into what all the older generations who are evangelical Christian have for years, which is, all the scripture about how, you become against God's people and you're going to pay a price for that. You want to be, you will be cursed, right? It's like going back to Deuteronomy, right? Cursings and blessings. And there's lots of other scripture. And the different approach that these folks are typically using is that, for instance, all the promises to Israel are really now, Israel is now the church, and therefore, Israel's kind of just put it away. It doesn't exist anymore. It's just the church now. And so they become somewhat, if you start reading their terms, they become somewhat almost hostile to Israel. Well, on the other side, you got people who think they're not interpreting things correctly, that there are things that God promises to people of the Jewish race, that they are His chosen people in certain ways. He works through them. There are mentions of them all the way through Revelation, and so we need to be careful about that, right? And so that's sort of one thing going on. But then there's also the whole deal of looking at what's going on now and what's the wisest thing, right? There's people that say, well, I don't think Iran's close to a nuclear weapon. And there are people on the other side who's like, well, why do you think they're hiding the reactor under a mountain? I don't think that's for energy. And about how to do things, when to do things. So we could just keep going. I don't want to take up all the time. But the point is, there are a lot of intersecting things happening, which kind of are making people that are normally on the same side not on the same side.
Let me add another intersecting thing here. If they decide they need to go after and take out the Fordo nuclear facility, I'm fine with that. If they decide we can come to an agreement and we have a way to monitor this, I'm okay with that as well. The concern I have is that Article 1 of the Constitution gives Congress the power to declare war. We haven't declared war since World War II, but we've been engaged in a lot of military actions.
Yes.
And so the question is, there are members of Congress who are saying, before you take this step and you commit U.S. forces and U.S. power and lives, you need to come to Congress to get something. And then one of the things they use is called the Authorization of Use of Military Force, AUMF. And I'm sort of there. I feel like Trump, don't make this decision yourself.
Yes.
If you're going to take this step, you really need to go to Congress and get some kind of backing from them. It doesn't have to be a declaration of war, because they've done a lot of things where we've committed troops that we didn't declare war, but you need Congress being behind it, because that's the representatives of the people.
So George W. Bush did something like that. It wasn't, and again, we're talking about a B-2 Spirit stealth bomber that actually carries the what is called the MOP, a massive ordnance penetrator, and it's 30,000 pounds, which is only carried by the B-2 stealth bomber.
And my recollection is Bush wasn't pleased about having to do that, but he felt like he had to do it.
And even went to the United Nations, if I remember right. But go ahead.
Yeah, and that brings up a couple of things. Number one is there's a lot of people, again, who are more on the not necessarily the pro-Israel side, that are saying, well, this kind of sounds like what Cheney said, and and then they were totally wrong. There really wasn't all these
weapons of mass destruction.
But the other thing I would say is, if I had to guess, I think Trump is trying to push them to come to an agreement to end this thing, to stop all this. But if they don't, what I think is the most likely thing is for us to give Israel the bomb to drop themselves, and for us to be just provide some of the ammunition,
which we've already been doing anyway.
Yeah, exactly. So that would be my guess. That'd be my guess.
They'd have to fly the the B-2 Stealth, because that's the only one I think that carries the bomb. Yeah. So they can't carry it with a Israeli plane. But we have a lot more to cover, and that's good, because we'll leave it as a cliffhanger. Come back and talk about more right after this.
"1972. Point of View was one of a kind, the first Christian conservative talk radio show bridging the gap between biblical values and political action. Over a half a century later, Point of View still stands unique. Consider this testimonial from David, a listener of Point of View. He said, "Point of View is the one place I can go that I can hear kindness addressing the difficult issues. You can speak the truth and still say it in the right way, and that's something I appreciate." When you support Point of View, you're equipping Americans to live out their biblical values and to speak truth boldly in the right way. Point of View needs your support right now. Will you donate generously before the end of our fiscal year, June 30th? Give today at pointofview.net or call toll-free 1-800-347-5151. That's pointofview.net and 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just wanted to tell you, too, how much I have appreciated Point of View over the years. I've always been taught that we take care of our own, and I feel like Point of View is one of our own because of the Christian worldview that you do promote. And so I have become a partner today, and I just want to thank you so much, and just God bless you for all that you do.
Listen, I wanted to make a quick comment. I'm a relatively new listener to the show, and I really kind of stumbled upon it more than anything because I'm doing some driving now that I wasn't in the past. And my comment really is, I think you guys and gals are more right on about the assessment of this country right now than anything I've heard. You know, I go home and I tell my wife, you've got to hear what they're talking about on the show. It's just so right on. And I tell my parents the same thing.
I'm 25 years old, and I started listening to Point of View about 4 years ago, and it has changed the way that I think and the way that I view the world around me.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, we're going to get into some other issues, but I thought we'd just for a few more minutes at least talk about, if you will, the animus or the anger and the back and forth that has surfaced, and that certainly fits into the Horseshoe Coalition article. Let me just mention also, I think Brian Kennedy does a very good job. Israel, Iran, and the Trump Doctrine, which goes on for pages, helps you understand, some of the issues involving Iran all the way back to some of the overthrow that was taking place back in 1953, and then the Shah of Iran being overthrown in 1979, and kind of where we are right now. But I thought for just a minute I might just go around the round table and talk about, as Kelly, you mentioned, we really just see a lot of polarization. And my goodness, anybody that's watched, I'll just pick on Ted Cruz and Tucker Carlson. I mean, Tucker Carlson first asking how many people live in Iran. Well, that's 93 million, but he didn't know that. And asking what Bible verse, and pretty soon I was waiting for him to have him sing all the verses of the Iranian national anthem. I wasn't sure where we're going with this thing. And then Ted's coming back and challenging him as well. And on most issues, these two individuals would agree. And yet when you go through this list, you've got Marjorie Taylor Greene and Steve Bannon and a variety of others that are saying something. Candace Owens, who would be considered conservatives. And then you got David Hogue and certainly Senator Schumer and Ro Khanna and Chris Murphy. And I mean, goodness, are we ever going to bring this country back together over something as simple? I mean, I'm not saying it's not important or even complex, but do we support Israel or not? Do we help Israel defeat Iran and to prevent a nuclear weapon or not? And this has surfaced an incredible number of emotions, hasn't it?
Well, absolutely. I mean, one of the reasons that people voted for Trump was that they thought he spoke out against what happened with Cheney and Bush and that whole thing. He
did.
And it's not a campaign slogan. He really is a peace type president. He will want something very provocative. Like I remember at the beginning of his last term, you had the situation where you had chemical weapons being used, and I think that was as much about sort of sending a signal that this guy's crazy and he's liable to blow you up if you do anything, and it creates kind of peace. And that's kind of his approach. But he is about not getting into foreign wars, not getting into these long conflicts.
Right.
And a lot of people, Tucker Carlson included, that's a big deal to them. That's why they don't like the Ukraine situation, right?
Yeah.
They feel like we're getting involved in some foreign war that doesn't really involve us. And so that is a part of the MAGA movement. But I don't know that this is outside of that, right? I mean, it's not like I can't imagine President Trump. I would be shocked for President Trump to say, we're putting boots on the ground in Iran, okay? That's not what we're talking about here. But that whole sort of peace side on the foreign policy is part of what is leveraging into this. And so I think that's where the other thing that I think, again, very similar to Bush and Cheney saying, trust us. There's these, there's weapons of mass destruction. And people are like, And now you've got people, even Tulsi Gabbard, saying, well, they really weren't close to a
nuclear weapon.
To a nuclear weapon.
Yeah,
so you've got that going on, and it's a weird situation where they're like, hey, wait, we told you not to do this. You said you weren't going to do this kind of thing. And you've got the fact that Israel is the one who initiated this, right? Yeah. Trump was trying to work something out, and then before he could finish, Israel, drops a bomb and starts attacking all these things. Now, to be fair, Trump had a 60 days, and Iran wasn't playing ball in the 60 days, and so on 61st day is when Netanyahu did what he did. So it's a different situation that is causing some division in the MAGA camp.
And the problem with Iran is it's not just Iran, because they fund the proxies, the Hezbollah, Houthis, Hamas, and so forth, other places to create problems. And so from my standpoint, I don't think you get a changed Iran unless you get a regime change.
There you go.
Problem with regime change is what follows. And so even though Trump doesn't want to get into nation building, George W. Bush did not want to get into nation building, campaigned on we don't want to get into nation building, ended up having to get into nation building because of Iraq. And so if you go out and you take out the Ayatollah there, and they've already taken out a number of the military and other leaders. If you take out the Ayatollah, do you get the son of the Shah is willing to come back? But who do you have? If you do that, then you sort of own what's happened there, and do you then have to send in troops? Getting to Kelly's point of trying to maintain order until you get some kind of new regime there, and who knows? So I think Kelly's probably right that Trump is using the 2 weeks as a pressuring point to try to get Iran to say. And I did hear the head of the Atomic Energy Commission this today, I think, saying we could go in and if we have clear access to things, we could make sure they don't have it. We can do that. Yeah. They've never had that clear access to it. So I don't know where they'll come down, but I get the impression Netanyahu would like to have regime change there.
Well, if I can quote Henry Kissinger, and I don't do this very often, when you look at Iran, is it a cause or a country? You know, the Ayatollah, it's a cause. He's in his 80s, and if you took him out, he'd want to be a martyr for Islam. But you're getting what seems to be some side channels, because there were some individuals saying that they're willing to talk. And are those some individuals that aren't necessarily in allegiance to the Ayatollah who are saying, yeah, if we don't have the Ayatollah here, we would kind of like to still have a country.
Right.
And we would like to still be able to manage this country, although they've done such a poor job of managing the economy, even given, of course, all of the various restrictions on them as well. So that could be a different kind of regime change. Regime change like George W. Bush tried to do, bring in the Marines, didn't work. Regime change like the fall of the Berlin Wall, regime change like the end of the Iron Curtain, and all of that, where all of a sudden Czechoslovakia becomes the Czech Republic and Slovakia, and all of a sudden you have Hungary and Poland and all sorts of countries actually wanting to move towards some kind of change. That kind of regime change would be a positive, wouldn't it?
My sense is that the people of Iran would like to have regime change, the majority. But if you've had your country bombed, sometimes you get sort of patriotic about your country just because it's your country.
Yeah. Well, again, that's why he's maybe just got this because a lot of people, including my wife, saying, why has he got this 2 week? Well, maybe he's still
does 2 weeks on a lot of
things. Yeah. 2 weeks because maybe there's something that could bring about internal change. And if you could get the inspectors in there to say that, Tulsi Gabbard was right. Of course, remember, Donald Trump said, I don't care what she says. Yeah. We'll see where that plays out. But nevertheless, we've covered Iran and Israel for a while, but I thought when we come back, we do have a few things happening in this country, not the least of which is, what about this auto pen? What about these L.A. protests, a variety of other issues? And how about some good news? 139,000 new jobs in May, beating expectations 3 months in a row. Some things are positive. We'll talk about that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, the current debate about the federal budget centers on whether the government is too big and too inefficient. Most Republicans argue the federal government is too big. Many Democrats ask, well, where's your evidence that government has grown too big? John D'Elio is the co-author of a significant book about American government. He explains that government grows larger by using three types of what is called administrative proxies. The first are state and local governments. The EPA, for example, has fewer than 20,000 employees, but 90% of EPA programs are completely administered by thousands of state government employees, largely funded by Washington. Second, there are for-profit businesses and contractors that also mask the large size of the government. In the Defense Department, for example, the hundreds of thousands of civilian workers have been supplemented by hundreds of thousands of for-profit contract employees. Today, the government spends more on defense contracts than it does on official federal bureaucrats. Third, there are the various tax-exempt or independent sectors, which have more than doubled in the last 30 years. Many of them owe their jobs to federal or intergovernmental grant, contract, or fee funding. These facts will be important to remember when Congress and the public debate the federal budget. Although the number of federal employees look about the same as in previous decades, the federal budget is more than 4 times larger, and the federal workload has been dispersed and makes government look much smaller than it really is. We do have a big government and should not fall for this federal shell game that tries to hide from taxpayers the real size and scope of government. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free booklet on the biblical view on wokeness, go to viewpoints.info/wokeness. That's viewpoints.info/wokeness. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, we've been talking about what's happening overseas, but let's not forget some things happening here. First of all, we want to talk about the L.A. protest. I've got a piece by Ben Shapiro. By the way, he's got an upcoming book. I know I'm going to buy it, Lions and Scavengers, talking about the scavenger mentality. Cal Thomas talks about handicapping the L.A. protest, and one that I thought about posting, but I did not. But Rich Lowry talked about the rioters' white hood, how many of these individuals are wearing masks. It used to be we weren't supposed to wear a mask. Then everybody's supposed to wear a mask. Now they're saying, well, we don't want the ICE to wear a mask, but we see a lot of these protesters wearing masks. A little bit later, I do want to get into a couple of things. As we mentioned earlier in the week, John Cornyn was actually looking at the question of who was running the government, given the fact that it's pretty obvious now that Joe Biden was not. We've got a very good piece by Merrill Matthews about the president using an auto pen, and so that certainly gets into some other topics that we can address as well. But for just a minute, let's, if you can, talk about the ongoing battle and the protests, because it does seem to me that if I can use Cal Thomas's piece, almost all the surveys, Dr. Merrill Matthews, seem to suggest that most people were not encouraged by the demonstrations. They began to be very unpopular, and if nothing else, it just illustrated that most Americans respect law and order, and that's not what they saw in the streets of people protesting ICE.
You see, that's the interesting point to me, because as I was listening to the news almost always said mostly peaceful protest. And I'm looking at this and I say, well, I see fires burning over there, and they're ordering hearing Waymo auto taxis coming, robot taxis, and they're setting them on fire. And you've got flags waiting and people standing on cars. I've watched cars that had to push through and run over people because some of the protesters were getting around, pounding on cars and stopping just a car moving through the traffic. I come back and think, this reminds me back of 2020 and the George Floyd thing when they said these were peaceful protests, and you look at, well, wait a minute, all these stores were robbed and people were beaten up over here, and police were having to run in some cases because of the rioters. I'm mystified by the media calling this mostly peaceful protest. In some cases it probably was, but most of what I saw looked pretty violent.
I mean, there's a part of me that looked at this and I thought, if Trump was like to do hire some fake type situation that would be the best for him, he couldn't have set this up any better. I mean, we've seen this before. All Americans have seen it. The George Floyd thing, all the protests, the media kind of trying to, gaslight everybody, and people are kind of past that now, and they realize that's just ridiculous. This is not peaceful. I'm seeing fires. I'm seeing people with masks on that look violent to me,
and waving Mexican flags.
That's the other thing. I'm thinking if I was Trump and I said, okay, what can we create that's like fake? Let's have them have Mexican flags. I mean, I can't think of a worse scenario for the other side. And you think of it, you think, how? What? I mean, at first I start thinking, okay, there's something I'm not getting.
Yeah.
And no, what I'm not getting is that these groups behind this are so radical that they're so out of touch with the American people that they think this is good. And so it's like the Democratic Party is shrinking.
That's your point you made last week.
And shrinking, and they're so radical now that they're just hurting themselves beyond reason. They need more breadth so that sane voices can say, no, we're not going to do that. That's stupid. But they can't because they've so pushed people out that they're doing crazy stuff like this. And of course, the only thing they had going for them is they got Justice Breyer's brother for their district court
His
judge,
younger brother,
to say that we don't have a king here, and right before the No Kings rally, that's not political or anything as a judge. And then of course he goes to the Ninth Circuit, one of the most liberal federal court of appeals in the country, and late last night, unanimously, including, was it a Biden appointee, I think was on there? It was either a Biden or Obama. I think it was a Biden appointee, unanimously saying, no, the president does have the authority to call out the National Guard. So I just can't think of a bigger failure as a political movement than what they were doing. And just one of the dumbest things I've ever seen, and certainly it's not helping them. It's sort of digging a bigger hole.
And one of the things we have, the issue has been raised. I don't know that we have any real information on it yet, but is somebody behind this funding some of these things that are going on? And I know in times past, some of the protests, there were people who could go to some office or some building, and they were paid to make signs all day. Somebody was putting the money there and bringing food in and other things. So there's been some speculation that George Soros or some of the others may have. Don't know if that's the case, but is somebody funding this behind the scenes?
Well, some of those groups, it was shown, the groups behind these things, I mean, were given money by USAID. They were given they were given taxpayer money.
That's right.
To help engage in these protests. So I know I didn't get to see it. I don't know if you covered it earlier this week, but what is it, $93 billion or $96 billion at the end? This is in a Senate committee. Were pushed out.
At the very end.
At the very end of the Biden administration to nonprofit groups who weren't even known. They violated all kinds of things to just throw this money. And this is the type of thing that they were using money for. So, again, it's sort of I don't know what you would call it, but a legitimization of Doge. Because American people don't want this. They don't like it. They're not going to believe the lies, and they certainly don't want their tax money going to it.
And when they passed Obamacare in 2010, they did the same thing. They had a lot of money there that they were handing out to all kinds of nonprofits, new and sometimes, some that had been around for a while. But all you had to do is go create a nonprofit to get a bunch of money to say we're going to help people navigate the ability to go on Obamacare, the government health insurance site, and be able to sign up for this. But that was a way that the Obama administration helped a lot of their friends by passing federal dollars out to these NGOs and other groups, nonprofit groups, so that they could do this. But they also had money then to keep other things going.
Yeah. One other one I wanted to put on the table is, okay, we recognize that some of the activists out there in the streets don't realize that it's an 80-20, probably more like a 90-10, and they're in the 10. But you would think members of Congress would understand that. And I'm thinking of, for example, the senator from Minnesota who has in front of her first of all, cabinet officer Pete Hegseth, and is saying, why are you bringing in the military? Because Tim Walz, who is the governor at the time, he handled it quite well. At this point, Pete Hegseth is like, what world and planet did you live in which to burn down the police headquarters and all the rest? Mm-hmm. Then you had this latest one with the, and since we have so many people in the state of Michigan that listen to this program, Senator Slotkin, who again is one of the rising stars, has a real problem again in the Armed Services Committee about Hegseth bringing in the military. And I'm thinking, okay, I can understand why the activists out there in the streets think they're doing, if you will, the Lord's work. But what is it about some of these members of the United States Senate actually wanting to seemingly support the radicalism and the chaos in the streets?
Well, I mean, I really think it goes back to the underlying problem. And this, I heard this on a story earlier today on the Democratic Party.
Yes.
The DNC, and how they're falling apart. They're all fighting each other and all this type of thing. They are... I mean, gosh, they are just really, really hurting themselves and reeling because they are not in tune with the American people, and they're really in the part of sort of a circular firing squad right now, when they need to go broader and they need to state these things, but they see these things, and it's all the basis behind every bit of this is I hate Trump. And it's the old Trump derangement syndrome.
It does seem to be.
Because they're so angry, hate him so much, everything that he does, they immediately see as an opportunity. And so as long as what he does is like an 80% issue, he's just like setting them up. Because that's all they have. They have no positive message, no positive future, it's all we hate Trump. And then they make crazy arguments. And they just lose more and more American people in this.
And you mentioned senators, but it's also Governor Gavin Newsom who brought that lawsuit. And if anybody should understand this better, it's him, and yet he brought the suit.
Yeah, you got governors California, Illinois, New York, and Minnesota, and they were in front of Congress. We come back, though, let's, if we can, talk about whether or not Biden was fit for office. We'll be right back.
It was not that long ago that censorship appeared to be almost inevitable. Free speech was being attacked and strangled in many places. And some of us wondered if this was the end. But now, many feel a new sense of hope, a chance for a fresh dawn. Let me caution you, now is not the time to relax. It's a time to press forward, to use this fresh opportunity to proclaim and learn how to apply truth to current issues. By the fact you're here, listening right now, that tells me that you recognize the vital role Point of View plays as a voice of truth. For more than 50 years, we've informed and equipped people who have made a real difference. And when you give to Point of View today, you breathe life into what can be a new golden era for the truth. Please, take a moment right now and invest in truth. Visit pointofview.net or give at 1-800-347-5151. That's pointofview.net. Click in now or call 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Earlier in the week, I mentioned that there are certain things happening that would have been big news if it weren't for all the things happening with, of course, the protests in the streets and, of course, Iran and Israel. But nevertheless, one of those which I did mention was the fact that the U.S. Senator John Cornyn, who, by the way, is running for re-election, we talked about that the other day, actually co-chaired a hearing which had this title, Unfit to Serve, How the Biden Cover-Up Endangered America and Undermined the Constitution. You didn't have quite a number of Democratic senators showing up for that committee meeting, but nevertheless, it brings us to one of the other articles we've posted. And Dr. Merrill Matthews, this week you wrote a piece, Trump has a point about presidents using an auto pen. And of course, we wouldn't be talking about the auto pen if we felt that the President of the United States, at least the previous president, had his mental faculties intact. But nevertheless, you've sort of dug into this whole issue of the auto pen. I think we've learned a few things we didn't know. It's
interesting because on June 4th, Trump signed a presidential memorandum asking the government to look into some of Biden's mental acuity decline and other issues, including his use of the auto pen. Mm-hmm. And so that has got this sort of whole thing going. Representative Comer, who's head of the Government Oversight Committee, is going to hold investigations into the possible use of the auto pen. Biden came up when some of these accusations came out and said, I authorized all these, but he didn't say he signed these various things. And it raises the question because the Constitution says that the president has to sign legislation if he approves of it. So that seems to be fairly clear. But in 2005, somebody from the Justice Department, Howard Nielsen, looked at this and released a 30-page document saying, well, at the time of the writing of the Constitution, sign could also mean somebody can sign something for you in your presence. If you have that knowledge, they could sign something for you. So he just sort of out of nowhere said, it's all right if a president authorizes somebody else to sign legislation for him. Well, that was during George W. Bush's time. He didn't use that. But then in 2011, Barack Obama was overseas. Legislation was coming up and getting passed. I think it was the Patriot Act, if I remember right.
Wow.
He didn't have time. Normally what would happen is these things would be flown to the president wherever he is. He would sign it. But the timeline on the Patriot Act was real short, so he authorized the signing of that legislation with an auto pen. First time in history, apparently, a bill had been signed with an auto pen. And that got somebody else writing in the Journal of Law and Technology a year or two later saying, it actually has to be signing, or he goes on to talk about the history of wills and how a will can be signed. But he said you could also have the president could be there and authorize somebody by him to sign it, but it has to be signed by the president. So now we don't know exactly where this is because there's no question that presidents can use this to sign invitations and pictures and things like ceremonial types of things nobody cares about. But can the president use an auto pen to sign a bill if the Constitution says the president has to sign it? And then could they use executive orders? Could the president use an auto pen for executive orders or other things? Or what came up during the inauguration is pardons.
Yeah.
And there's a group now, a pro-energy group that has apparently bringing a suit against the administration, the Biden administration, saying they think he used an auto pen to sign certain executive orders relating to energy, and they think this hurts them, and they're pressing this to see if it can't be created or moved to say signing with auto pen on something like that is null and void, which would then take those executive orders out of action. So we don't know where we are right now, but it's an interesting case, and we'll have to see what happens.
Yeah, I think this is kind of a disturbing thing to allow to happen.
I agree.
I mean,
Article 1, Section 7, right?
Mm-hmm.
There it is.
And I
Constitution.
Think, it's different. I mean, a lot of us now, when we sign things, we get an email and we
know the drill.
We can do the electronic type deal, but it's still us. Mm-hmm. It's not somebody else.
Not a machine doing it.
So depending upon what you mean by the auto pen, if what you mean is the president can sign digitally from some other place, that's a signature, right? But the auto pen is not the president signing at all.
Especially when he doesn't seem to know about it.
And then it's really dangerous because, I mean, we could have over 1,000 pardons that weren't the president, and those are invalid. It's the problem is proving any of this, proving that it wasn't Biden who signed these, even through the auto pen. It wasn't him. It was somebody else. That's the difficulty. Absent somebody kind of coming forward and going, well, yeah, I did about 100 of these pardons. I think it's going to be very difficult to win anything, but I do think it highlights that it's something that we ought to take care of as a country, because this should not. I mean, I think what should happen is Congress should take care of this. I don't know that they will. So as a result of that, I think what's going to have to happen is somebody's going to have to get their ox gored by one of these and say this isn't a valid signature.
The thing that happened is that since every president had signed legislation, and even flying them halfway around the world to be signed
back in the old
up
days.
Until 2011, this sort of implies that the presidents thought they had to physically sign the legislation.
Yeah.
But now you have the issue of Biden, and this was sort of brought present when Speaker Johnson said he was visiting with Biden, and Biden he mentioned something that an executive order that Biden signed. He said, I never signed that executive order. And he said, well, yes, you did sign the executive order. And it sounded like Biden didn't know he had signed it. He may not have signed it. We just don't know. And that's where the issue of it becomes really, really important on things of law and other important documents that the president physically signed the document.
How about when the cameras are rolling and he signs it in front of the camera? Have you noticed that going on lately?
Trump makes a big show of having the media in, signs it, turns around and shows it. There's no question he signed this.
People have got to know something because it's just too funny. When we were announced for the Commission on Religious Liberty, the president said, "Come here." Into the Oval Office. Okay, here we go. Just last second. And he's got this little box of pens on his right. And what people don't know is you think it's just pens and he's going to give you a ceremonial pen. No. It's been branded. The pen has his signature on the outside of the pen. It has Donald Trump on the outside. It's like merchandise, right? Yes. That he's
no surprise there.
Yeah. So he gave us all one of those, and I was just cracking up because who brands their pens that they're signing this with? But Donald Trump special right there.
You got to bring it next week just so we can show it off.
What you often see, and you've seen this in the past, I suppose our audience has, when a president signs a piece of legislation, he'll have several pens that he'll make a little mark and then he'll hand it to somebody, then he'll make a little more of a signature and hand it to somebody. So they all get a copy of the pen that signed the legislation. Donald Trump takes one pen and signs this thing big and bold, turns around and shows it, and then hands pens to people.
Yeah,
that's right.
And puts them in the back box so you don't know whether you have the one or not.
Yeah.
And, if you've ever been to the White House or even the executive office building, they have like one place where it had all the pens that Lyndon Johnson signed to the Great Society program. And so there's a whole, if you will, set of exhibits about pens and all of that. But that brings us back to the key point. Does this go to Congress? Hopefully. If it doesn't, does it ever go to the Supreme Court? Because you've got a lawsuit right now, which I think is a good one, and that is you have signed all these executive orders. They have actually harmed executives and various companies that are in energy. And so you could actually say you have standing. And standing would then allow you to go almost immediately to the Supreme Court. So if the Congress doesn't deal with it, does the court deal with it? What's about that?
I think they do eventually. Again, I think in the best case, you have evidence that it wasn't even the president.
Yes, then, if you had some evidence like that.
Then you set up a really good case for the whole auto pen and how you deal with it. But gosh, I don't know how that. I mean, I know the Republicans, after what they just went through, would probably be in favor of this, right?
Yes.
But it really doesn't matter which party. It shouldn't. And I wonder how the Democrats see this. Do they think, hey, we might have somebody in the future who doesn't know what they're doing and we might want this? I can't see that. Yeah. So, but they probably just can't support it now because it'll look like they're being anti-Biden in the past. But otherwise, I would think this would be the type of thing that most would agree with. They want the president to be responsible for what he does.
And just imagine, as the Supreme Court rules that these are null and void, then you have to go back and look at things. The legislation that Obama signed in 2011 on the Patriot Act may be null and void. It could have huge ramifications if you're saying these are not effective and actual if they were not signed by the president's hand.
Well, if nothing else, since we're coming to a break, let me just mention by Dr. Merrill Matthews, again, Trump has a point about presidents using an auto pen, and I thought you might find it interesting and might have a discussion around the table about that with some of your friends and neighbors. Let's come back and talk about the big, beautiful bill and the rescission package right after this.
Historic Christianity celebrates May 31st as the Feast of the Visitation, which has also been described as the first meeting of Jesus and John the Baptist. Mary, early in her pregnancy, travels to visit her cousin Elizabeth, who is much further along in her pregnancy with John the Baptist. The verse is Luke 1:44, where Elizabeth exclaims, "Behold, when the sound of your greeting came to my ears, the baby in my womb leaped for joy." Such an important moment, revealing John's recognition that Mary carries in her womb the coming Messiah. And though not yet physically formed, the Christ child is also a human baby. The Anglican Compass describes this as yet one more reason Anglicans are pro-life. Well, not every Anglican. For me, statements by Anglican Bishop N.T. Wright, New Testament scholar and one of the most influential theologians of our day, take him out of the pro-life category. Recently, on a YouTube podcast, Premiere Unbelievable, Bishop Wright was asked about whether Christians should defend life from the moment of conception. He posed exceptions for rape and incest, saying, quote, "With sorrow and a bit of shame, the best thing to do is as soon as possible to terminate this pregnancy," meaning, kill this baby. N.T. Wright gave a couple of examples, one being that when there is a possibility or fear of the child's severe deformity, the correctness of a decision to abort the child is, quote, "absolutely clear for the mental health of the mother." He also voiced his concern about the optics of unmarried men from the Catholic hierarchy telling a woman what she can and cannot do. He called this male bullying, which we should avoid like the plague. Matt Walsh of the Daily Wire features a segment he calls the Daily Cancellation. One day, a couple of weeks ago, he chose to cancel N.T. Wright. Abortion kills a human being. On abortion, Bishop Wright is wrong. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes, let me just mention again that we do have some other legislation moving through Congress, which you hear about every once in a while, so we'll talk about it right now. The so-called Big Beautiful Bill passed the House, went to the Senate. Senate and House look different. You also, at the same time, let's give credit where credit is due, President Trump did submit a rescission package that would codify all the DOJ cuts. And at the moment, that would claw back about $9.4 billion, which sounds like a lot, but when you're $37 trillion in debt, that's not a lot.
And when you were saying you were going to be able to cut $2 trillion to start out with,
that's not quite what we wanted. But Dr. Matthews, help us out here, because you've got the Senate parliamentarian ruling. You've got the difference between, of course, John Thune, who is in the Senate, and, of course, Mike Johnson, our good friend, in the House. You're trying to herd cats. It's really tough to get all that coming together.
Yeah, there's 3 or 4 really sticking issues. One is the SALT tax, the state and local tax. New York wants to make sure that number is higher. The Senate wants to make sure that number is lower. You have the issue of Medicaid, and Josh Hawley and some others seem to be very strong on trying to keep Medicaid and keep there are games that hospitals can play with states in order to maximize federal funds coming to them. The House wants to try to cut that back or eliminate it. The Senate seems to be fine with some of that. So you have that issue, and then you have Obamacare subsidies that were increased during the pandemic. The House wants to claw those back. The Senate is not so sure it wants to. And then there's some welfare benefits. So there's a number of things that even Republicans, and especially on green energy subsidies, some Republican states want to make sure that they keep those subsidies coming to the states. So it gets back to this issue of Republicans like to claim they want to be fiscal conservatives, but many times are not when it really hits the fan.
Yes.
This is a big deal. If they don't come to an agreement here,
wow,
every person's taxes, every person, of every income level, everybody's taxes are going to go through the roof. So I can't even imagine what's going to happen to the market.
Stock
before
market,
then.
not like that.
I mean, we're going to have a something that looks like the Great Depression. So they're playing politics like usual. You hope that they're gaming, and at the end, people are going to realize they've got to support this. If not, it's going to be a pretty massive shot to the economy and to every American. And there's no Democrat to blame. The Republicans have control. They have control in the House. They have control in the Senate. And as it comes to this, and it will be all on their desk and all their responsibility.
I think John Thune, the Senate Majority Leader, has implied that they're going to have to make some changes to pass something in the Senate, but then it has to go back to the House because the legislation in the House and Senate have to be identical. And then whether or not Speaker Johnson is going to be able to get Republicans to go along with the Senate bill, and if he can't, then they might have to make some changes. Then it goes back to the Senate again, and that's where the July 4 deadline looks really iffy right now.
I think so. And again, as Kelly just pointed out, that's what I call the Pottery Barn maxim: you break it, you own it. The Republicans are in control, and if they break it, they own it. So that is certainly the case. Just before we wind down, I always like to have some prayer targets, and one of those I might just mention is, Kelly, you are certainly raising funds for the fiscal year end, and I would encourage people to support First Liberty. I do so. Penedextra does. We support you. We also, on our website here, have Anchored to Truth. We're up to now $56,000 in terms of the match challenge. I'm thinking it's going to be even higher. But again, the bottom line is we certainly encourage people to pray about how they might want to respond between now and June 30th. But you also have some other prayer targets, because you've got a couple of cases that are pending or could be considered by the Supreme Court. Can you explain?
Yeah, we have 2 up there right now and 1 that's on the way. So 3 total. But the first one will be, I'm really praying they take this case, the Olivier case. That's ultimately will be the first case we've had about the right to share the gospel in public, in this case in a park, in many decades. And it's a horrible decision. It was a 9-8 split en banc on the Federal Court of Appeals, so it's the type of thing that gets their attention. Mm-hmm. The other one is the Cambridge Christian School case, which we have a state championship football game between 2 Christian schools that were not allowed to have a prayer before the game. Well, why? Because they said it was over a government microphone. And what they did in the case, the Court of Appeals, really in a shocking opinion, said, well, this was government speech. So anytime a private citizen can have their free speech wiped out by them claiming it's government speech, I mean, gosh, so is it government speech if you're on a public sidewalk or in a public park? The implications are huge. And so we have literally a record number of outside groups filing amici to say the Supreme Court really needs to take this. So I would just pray for those 2 cases right now as great opportunities for the Supreme Court to take something that I think if they took, we would win, but they have to take them. And they only take, last year I think it was 58 cases out of like 7,000. Mm-hmm. So we just really need prayer for those two cases.
I would think so. One of the cases we're still waiting for, certainly one was one that came down this week out of Tennessee, and that was the issue of transgender. The other is the Mahmoud case, which is out of Maryland. And that gets us back to, again, your theme, this whole idea of parental rights. The argument there is that we can actually, even at a very young age, expose kids to LGBTQ kinds of ideas, and that the parents don't even have a right to opt out.
Right.
And that case, in some respects, correlates with some cases you have in California and other places, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah, we just won a case in California, shockingly, with a liberal judge, but who said, no, look, the parents do have a right to notice. And these kids, if what you're trying to force them to do in this whole gender area violates their faith, they have a right to exempt themselves. The idea that the government can force them through some sort of indoctrination camp is really extreme. And so this Mahmoud case that we'll probably hear in the next 2 weeks from the Supreme Court on that,
right.
And this whole issue of parental rights is a big one. I mean, there are people who believe that they're going to use compulsory attendance to force your kid or your grandkid into a public school. And when your kid is there, your kid is theirs. It's a child of the state, and you don't have any rights as a parent. And that goes against everything that we've held in this country. Goes back to cases that are 100 years old that make very clear that in this country, one of the most fundamental rights is the right of a parent to direct the upbringing, including the religious upbringing, and the education of their own children. And that's what has to be really, unfortunately, has to be explained right now, because we have old cases that say you can't pass a law that say you have to go to a public school. So if you want to go to the Catholic school or the Christian school, private school, you can. But we don't have any that says what happens if you're in the public school. Do the parents give all their rights? That's what these cases are going to be laying out, and it'll affect millions and millions and millions of families and children.
As he said, probably the next time the Religious Liberty Commission meets will be on parental rights. And if you go to our website, you know that we've been encouraging you to contact your 2 United States senators about the Family Rights and Responsibilities Act, introduced in the Senate by Senators Tim Scott from South Carolina and Senator James Lankford from Oklahoma, introduced in the House by Virginia Fox. So if you haven't taken the time to do that, that is the case. And let me just mention again that if you want to follow what is happening there at First Liberty, just FLI, and we have that link on the website. And of course, I would encourage you to support them. And we of course have our banner up, Anchored to Truth, right at the moment, a $56,000 match challenge. So if you would like to give, it's a dollar for dollar match already available. We'll be talking about it next week, and I hope you have a great weekend. First of all, I want to thank Doug for stepping in as our engineer. Steve, thank you for producing the program. See you back here on Monday, right here on Point of View.
1972. Point of View was one of a kind, the first Christian conservative talk radio show bridging the gap between biblical values and political action. Over a half a century later, Point of View still stands unique. Consider this testimonial from David, a listener of Point of View. He said, "Point of View is the one place I can go that I can hear kindness addressing the difficult issues. You can speak the truth and still say it in the right way, and that's something I appreciate." When you support Point of View, you're equipping Americans to live out their biblical values and to speak truth boldly in the right way. Point of View needs your support right now. Will you donate generously before the end of our fiscal year, June 30th? Give today at pointofview.net or call toll-free 1-800-347-5151. That's pointofview.net and 1-800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.